At the time of this narration recording, the year is 2011, exactly 100 years after the Xinhai Revolution, which toppled the last dynasty in Chinese history, the Qing Dynasty, or also called the Manchu Dynasty. This episode is in tribute for a friend, as I was asked by her to explain my thoughts on the final imperial dynasty in Chinese history. This is for her, as well as for all the Chinese all over the world. There are undoubtedly many views on the so-called last dynasty in Chinese history, as some despise it for being possibly the worst in Chinese history, or not even calling it a Chinese dynasty at all. There are a number of reasons for the Chinese refusing to accept that this dynasty was a part of their history, and the social stigma that the world has when looking at China through this dynasty. When coming up for the narration of this video, I had to ask a friend who is actually a Han Chinese Manchu mix. Mother is Han Chinese, father is of Manchurian descent. She now identifies herself as Manchu for a number of reasons. As for who are the Manchu, it has a lot to do with how they view themselves. The Manchu people commonly refer to themselves as descendants of the Jurchen people, as in Korea they are called the Yojin. Manchu is also not technically the correct way of addressing the people, as older accounts call them Manju. Manchu is perhaps a westernization of the Manchu saying. The Yojin often had conflict with the Koreans, as when the Korean Goryeo dynasty existed, the Jurchens were often problematic for the Korean rulers. The Manchu did not control all of Manchuria as people today might imagine. They actually had their origins in a small area just north of Korea. Over time, they expanded slightly more but soon came under control of the Korean dynasty of Goguryeo. But after the dynasty collapsed, the Jurchens would continue on their nomadic lifestyle, often being subjugated by the Han Chinese. My Manchu friend told me they never forgot the rule by the Koreans, and one important reason why the early Qing dynasty forced Korea to pay tribute to the Qing and admit that they were superior was out of revenge. Now, people may not understand how dynasties rise and fall. When a dynasty falls, it loses all land that it had under its control previously. The next corresponding dynasty would then reconquer the lands lost during the collapse of the previous dynasty. When the Manchu were expanding the borders of the Qing during the mid to late 1600s, there was something happening. The Russians were expanding into Central Asia, which destabilized the region. All of the neighboring khanates were either being annexed into Russia or fighting among each other, not knowing that the real threat came from outsiders rather than another tribe. The Manchu realized that and soon expanded the borders of the Qing farther west than any other dynasty besides the Yuan dynasty, which preceded the Ming dynasty. Taking advantage of issues between the Uyghur and Tibetan kingdoms, the Manchu would eventually take over both lands, incorporating them into the Qing. However, there was not much Han immigration into these territories, not until the 20th century. The Manchu also expanded north, engulfing all of Mongolia, which had never fully regained its glory from the Yuan dynasty, founded by Kublai Khan, a grandson of the legendary Temujin, also known as Genghis Khan. I've heard that the Manchu originally claimed Mongolian land, including all of Lake Baikal, but with the Russians conquering Siberia, this claim was abandoned, seeing as it was too far from solid Manchurian control. Speaking of Manchu control, many say that the Manchu did not have full control over China. That's not the case. They did in fact have full control. But uprisings happen all the time in Chinese history. Every dynasty has its rebellions and upsurts. It's not fair to say they only happened during the Qing dynasty. But some of the worst incidents in Chinese history did happen at that time, or it would be more safe to say that these incidents were seen by the Western world. China has been around for eons in one name or another, and such things indisputably happened then as well. But were there any foreign records or accounts of it? No. So that's another stereotypical look of the dynasty as well. Adding to the narrow-mindedness of the Western world while looking at China through the Manchu dynasty is the dress. Many all around the world still think of the Chinese as wearing the che, the Manchu ponytail and dress. This is not Han Chinese clothing at all, but in fact traditional Manchu clothing when the Manchu forced the Han to wear in accordance with Qing law. Speaking of Han and Manchu interaction, when the dynasty was first established, the Manchu leadership did not favor interaction between the two peoples. But as time went on, the Manchu elite slowly began to become Sinicized, more Han Chinese-like, through customs, culture, and eventually intermarriage. Han and Manchu marriage, hence people like my friend who is of mixed descent. Why are mixed Han Chinese and Manchu more identifying themselves as Manchu only? For a few reasons. One reason that in the mainland the government looks more favorably toward minorities as they are exempt from the one-child policy which affects Han Chinese. Another reason is that as China becomes more democratic and does away with its communist ways, people embrace their Manchu heritage. It's no longer seen as a stigma to be of Manchu descent, as when the dynasty collapsed, Manchu people all over China were the subject of crime by the Han and other ethnic groups, mainly as an excuse for why China was in such a bad shape at the time. I do agree that out of the countless eons of Chinese history, the late Qing dynasty was perhaps the lowest point in Chinese history, and that's saying a lot. Shortly after the dynasty collapsed, it fell into feudalistic rule. Every region had its own local strongman who claimed to be the new emperor of China. There was no confidence among the people of China. What it meant to be Chinese itself was questioned. There was no real outlook of China as a nation again until the Kuomintang took control of all of China. Some say that China cannot truly know what it is like to have democracy, to be free, that the Chinese people will always prefer to be under the rule of some kind of authoritarian order, whether it's a monarchy, feudalism, communism, or nationalism. Does anyone think that China is free today? No. The mainland is under an outdated European method of government that's flawed from the start. Taiwan is under the control of a nationalistic government that is both friendly and hostile to any other political faction. And of course, the Chinese people have no say in this. This was not the problems that the Manchu caused, it's simply how China is. I remember hearing all the talk of the celebrations of the 100-year anniversary of the collapse of the Manchu dynasty. But I told my friend this, never say never. Who's to say that someday another dynasty will take control of China? Communism is definitely not forever, and its time as a method of government in China is just about up. So what after? Democracy under the Kuomintang once again? Possibly yes, but the question was asked after the collapse of the Qing dynasty. Can the Chinese people grasp the concept of democracy? Can they even understand the concept? Possibly, but we do know one thing. China is always changing, and these current or former methods of government will not last forever.